Thank you all for joining us on Mental Health Day. So my name is Mary Garcia. I'm the head of content at Meetup. And today is World Mental Health Day, a day meant to draw attention and promote mental well-being. We're joined by Natalia Rachel, a therapist and author of the book, Why Am I Like This? And she's going to talk about compassion today and why it plays such an important role in mental health and both also interpersonal relationships. So before we get into the conversation, just want to quickly go over some guidelines for the event. So this event will be recorded, but you will not appear on video. As a courtesy, you will all be muted during the event. It will just be our speaker featured on audio today. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you would like this feature, closed captioning is available. You can turn it on, click the live transcription icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preference. Just the agenda really quickly. I'll introduce our host speaker for the event. We'll get into a Q&A fireside chat and then open it up for questions from the people who've joined us in the audience. All right, so as I said, I am so pleased to introduce Natalia Rachel. Natalia is a proud recipient of the Women Icons Asia Award as an emerging entrepreneur for social impact. Her book, Why Am I Like This? From Penguin Random House came out last year. Natalia is a skilled content creator, ecosystem builder, and engagement expert. She's partnered with organizations to offer mental health resources and build communities. Since 2017, Natalia has been teaching trauma-informed open programs. Last year, she launched her flagship Human Intelligence Leadership Program in both Singapore and the United States, attracting participants from around the world who are committed to personal development and social change. Before we get into the Q&A, Natalia has offered to lead us in a meditation to kind of ground the space and ground the conversation. So I will open it up to Natalia now.
Thank you so much, Mary. Hello, everyone. How beautiful that we're tuning in from so many different corners in the earth. Before we begin today's session, I want to invite you to really drop into this space that we're creating and this time that we're sharing together. So take a moment now to just orient to the room you're in. Have a look at the space, the four walls, the ceiling, the floor, and just arrive. And whatever has been taking your time before today's session, just allow it to leave your awareness. You'll connect in with it very naturally at the end of the session. And similarly, anything that's waiting for you beyond this hour, allow it to reside in the future and just allow yourself to be here now, where we're setting a really intentional space today on Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Day, to tune into the energy of compassion and explore its importance in our individual and collective well-being. So just take a breath into that, and if it feels safe to do so and appropriate to do so, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment and take a nice intentional inhale and exhale, just coming in to you, to your intention for being here, tuning into your breath, your body, the seat or position that you're in right now, and taking a few moments to really connect to what brought you here. And breathe with that and be with that. And just notice if you feel like you might like any little micro adjustments to the position that you're in. Do you want to soften into your seat? Do you want to give your shoulders a roll or open your jaw or stretch your neck? Taking a moment of self-compassion for your body. And just as you connect to your intention to being here in your space, in your body and your breath, I also invite you to tune in and acknowledge and validate the presence of so many others who are joining all around the world, all with their own stories, walking in different shoes through different phases of life, but with the same shared intention to be here, to connect, to join, and explore the role of compassion in our well-being? What is it like to breathe with that, to be with that there are more of us all here together for the same purpose? And just take a couple of nice breaths in, nice and present now. Become aware of the room around you again, the sound of my voice. If you had your eyes closed, you may like to open them and connect with me visually, ready to begin our time together today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I feel like my blood pressure's already dropped at a normal level. Okay, great. So first things first, I would love to hear about your book. Why am I like this? Why did you decide to write this book?
Many people have been asking me to write a book for a really long time because I've lived through some pretty overwhelming and crazy, but also incredible things, but I wasn't ready. And a couple of years ago, I felt ready. Why am I like this is 40 years of my experience distilled both as a patient turned therapist. And it explores everything that I've learned as someone who's grown up in a lot of trauma and with a lot of mental health challenges and a lot of physical health challenges, and everything that I needed to do to emancipate myself and to heal and to live a life full of peace and power. And I think that resources, content, books, movies, art is the best way for us to empower each other. The truth is most people won't have access to therapy or other one-to-one resources. And so my intention with the book was to make everything I learned, learning and studying and healing all over the world, available to anybody who really wants to heal.
Great. What did you learn while writing it?
I learned that I will always be healing. It was a cathartic process for me to write it. And I also learned that there are some really clear areas for us to explore in order to heal and in order to create a world for ourselves where all is well. And another really important thing that I learned, which I think we'll discuss a bit more later, is that there's a lot that we can do for our own healing, but it's often the people in our stories and the connections that are so important. And also there's a systemic element. So the modern world that we're living can contribute to, or it can contribute to our pain and our unwellness or disease, but it can also contribute to our healing and our happiness and our vitality.
One of the themes of the talk today is around compassion. So I'm curious, just first off, what is compassion when you talk about it?
Compassion is empathy in action. It is the opposite of judgment and shame. And when we tap it, we find more ease and grace and peace as we navigate all of the challenges and joys of life.
So why is compassion so important for our mental health?
So if we consider that compassion is the opposite of judgment or shame, when we're not in compassion, we are often judging ourselves and others or shaming ourselves and others. And the energy of judgment and shame is not one of peace. It's not one of vitality. It's not one of wellness. So if we don't have compassion, it's going to be really hard to feel a sense of all is well in the world. And I think there's a lot of pressure in our world to succeed, to thrive, to climb the mountain, all of these things. And if we don't have compassion and we're not able to just welcome ourselves and meet ourselves where we are, life's going to be really, really difficult.
So you mentioned shame. I'm wondering, it's such a common feeling. How do you know when you're experiencing it?
Shame says, I am bad, I am wrong, I am not good enough, I am not worthy. And so those sentiments are ones that many of us feel on a regular basis. So if we're having those thoughts or those voices inside our heads, it's likely that we are experiencing shame. Also, there's that word should or shouldn't. The shoulds and the shouldn'ts often connect to shame, and we kind of try to coerce ourselves to be somewhere we're not. So those would be indicators. Another indicator of shame can be, not always, but it can be not speaking up. and not saying how we really feel or what we really want, dulling our light, losing authenticity. So when we experience shame, it's really hard for us to be our authentic selves because we feel not worthy, or like we are bad or wrong.
What do you think causes shame for a lot of people?
I think there are so many different things that can cause us shame. In early life, we are most influenced by nurture, so the people around us. So if we have had parents or family or community around us that have judged us or shamed us, which many of us have, it will be likely that we develop a self-identity that includes shame and judgment and does not have compassion. So if our parents or our community or our school has been really hard on us, we're more likely to feel a sense of shame. I also think that there's a modern world context. We live in a very competitive and comparison-based world. And if you think now with the rise of social media, everyone's looking at what everybody else is doing every single minute of the day. And that breeds shame as well. So there are all these different influences. Anything that asks us to push beyond our boundaries or anything that asks us to compare or compete with others will have a side helping of shame. And our job is to notice it and not internalize it. Or if we have internalized it, which most of us have to a degree, we have to learn to externalize it. That's not such an easy or simple job.
I'm wondering what you think about like the term shameless. Sometimes if someone has no shame, they can be criticized for it. Is there ever like a healthy amount of shame someone should have, or is it, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Such an interesting question. Wouldn't it be lovely if we were all at a place where we felt confident in who we are and our voice and our expression in the world? I think that the term shameless has a negative connotation, which goes along with the sentiment that I don't care how my expression is received by anybody else. And there's a fine line, isn't there? Because on the one hand, we want to be expressed and we want to be authentic, but in an ideal world, we are also going to be sensitive to how other people receive us. And those of us that are healing from years or even decades or even generations of shame and the quieting of the self or the loss of the self, there's often this phase during the healing journey where all of a sudden we go in the other direction. We're like, hear me roar, listen to my voice. I don't care about your boundaries. This is me. And that's a beautiful, empowering phase or stage, but it is a stage if we continue on the epic arc or many arcs of the healing journey. I think as we continue and we heal that part of ourselves and learn to really love ourselves and value ourselves, we also can become sensitive to how our voice and how our expression may be received. And so often then there's this quieting down or refinement of expression. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think it makes sense. I do. I think as someone who does struggle with what I should do, what I think I should do, the pressure, seeing people on social media, I compare myself to, I definitely have experience like, oh, I should be doing this. So if you do find yourself in this situation where you're experiencing negative shame, what are some steps for shifting out of that?
I think the first thing is to be able to notice, oh, there's that voice again telling me I'm no good, or telling me I'm not good enough, or telling me I should be better or different to how I am. And that is a practice in itself. So, step one would be learning to notice, oh, there's that shame again. Oh, there's that shame again. The next thing is to set a boundary with it. And so, usually, the shame will tell us to take an action, which will be to not do something or to do something that we don't really want to do. So we will then express and relate and create from an impulse of shame. And so once we learn to identify it, we can set a boundary with ourselves and say, well, I'm not going to let shame lead me anymore. And we can ask ourselves, what would be the act of self-compassion in this moment? And usually it will be different. It might be many things depending on the situation. But the moment we pause and we set a boundary and say, I'm not going to speak from that shame or act from that shame, make decisions from that shame, we start to repattern the world around us. Many of us are this rolling reaction to threat and exclusion, which is my definition of trauma. And shame is one of the biggest things synonymous with that. So we keep making choices based on what we should do or what we think we should do, or because we don't deserve anything. And when we start recognizing that and setting a boundary and choosing differently, we enter this huge space of repatterning the world around us. But it's very hard. And usually, when we begin the journey, we might feel very overwhelmed or very anxious to choose differently, because somewhere along the line, we've been told that if we go the other way, we will be bad or wrong or rejected or abandoned, or in some cases, even harmed or penalized. And so, again, that's most of our trauma. And when we start to put these healthy boundaries in place with our shame and do it anyway, it's likely that we'll feel quite overwhelmed or anxious. But there's something really powerful in moving through that anyway, because ideally we learn, oh, taking steps or acting or expressing from a more compassionate place doesn't have negative consequences. Or sometimes it does, but then navigating those is part of the greater unfolding of our own sovereignty.
I think you're right. It is a very powerful and difficult process. Can you talk about an example where you or someone you know has gone through those steps of overcoming shame by noticing it and setting boundaries?
Gosh, I think I still do it. I'm not immune. I think to me, it's a daily act. It's a minute by minute act. Right now, I'm in London and I'm taking a pause between working in the US and working in the Netherlands. And so I've got a few days just for myself. And the shaming part of me wants me to work, and not take a rest, because I'm here and spending money on a hotel and I should be doing A, B, C, D. And the compassionate part of me says, well, hey, Natalia, you've been working for 2 weeks and you're about to go and work again in Europe. And it's really important that you just enjoy the rest and the space and celebrate yourself for being here. So there are these little moments that I navigate daily. Bigger ones in the past would have been back in my journey with mental health and physical illness, to say, no, I don't want to have this treatment anymore, or no, I don't want this doctor anymore. They were really hard. And I had to set those boundaries with my shame as well, to say, no, like, you don't have to do what you should do or what you told. You need to do what would be right for you. So I think these decisions, these choices, these boundaries, these moving towards compassion have been a process for me for years.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Obviously, shame is such a huge barrier to mental health. I'm curious what you think the other major sources of, again, other barriers for mental health are, and where that stigma might come from.
I think in the world that we live in, things are not as they ought to be, or they certainly aren't as they weren't a couple of 100 years ago. So most of us are living far beyond our capacity. We're running at full steam, and we are experiencing fatigue or anxiety or feeling low, feeling apathetic. And we shame ourselves for not being able to be these bright, bubbly, healthy superstars all the time. And I think a large part is because the structure of the world doesn't support our vitality. And so I think getting really real about this systemic piece is very important. We're told we should be able to work however many hours a week, and we should be able to afford to rent or to buy a house, and we should be able to afford to go on holiday, and we should do all of this stuff with a smile on our face. And if we're parents, we should do all of that and be a parent. And it's not realistic. If we think back a couple of hundred of years ago, we lived in community, we lived in villages, and everybody would be sharing the load of many different roles. There was more balance because we were better at collaborating. But the world we live in now is quite divisive. It's also a capitalist world, and it's also a world where there's a lot of polarity and conflict. So I think all of these things contribute to our mental health, and just bringing that picture into view allows us to get more compassionate because we can learn, well, there's nothing wrong with me, but in the context of this world, I don't necessarily have the resources I need to thrive. And to me, when we understand ourselves within context, there's an immediate opportunity to let go of shame and say, well, of course, that's why I'm like this. And that's the title of the book, isn't it? Why am I like this? We all wonder, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why am I thriving? Why am I good as the next person? Or why can't I get to where I want to go? We're living in pretty hard times. And just validating that can be really powerful.
Hmm. It's a lot, but I think you're right. I'm also wondering what the role, I, it's no surprise that burnout has really been on the rise for a lot of people during the pandemic, since, the world is open back up again. I'm wondering how that plays a role in what you're talking about, these modern conditions that make it really tough to thrive, and why there's this rise in burnout for people.
Burnout and mental health are connected. They are both the results of living beyond our capacity. So, one of the ways I like to describe this is the boiling pot analogy. So, imagine that you are a pot sitting on a stove with the heat turned up, and you start bubbling and bubbling and bubbling and bubbling, and you just leave the heat on all the time. Eventually, that pot is either going to overflow or it's going to dry up. That's exactly what happens when we are living beyond our capacity. Some people present with mental health symptoms. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, maybe it's something more complex. Some people present with physical health conditions. Usually, we are experiencing at both levels. There'll be some physical changes and there'll be some mental health changes, but we tend to become more aware of one of them. At the same time that we're having issues on both of those layers, usually our relationships suffer as well. So I always look at the mental health layer, the physical health layer, and the relationship layer. And so to me, burnout and mental health go hand in hand. We can't really separate them. There's also high functioning burnout and low functioning burnout. So if we have low functioning burnout, we are exhibiting clear symptoms physically of really not having enough energy to do all of the things we need to do. If we have high functioning burnout, we're more like a beautiful swan on the water, and underneath our feet are pedaling, pedaling, pedaling. And so we look like we're fine, but actually we're not. It typically will be associated with anxiety as well, but we're just really good at performing. And actually, in my opinion, it's the high functioning kind of burnout and high functioning anxiety that is more dangerous, because often we can't spot it in ourselves and we can't spot it in others. We think, wow, how does that person handle everything? Gosh, they're a superstar. No one's meant to handle so much. We've just got really good at performing.
Oh, absolutely. And that constant performing for other people is just another source of shame if you feel like you can't keep up. Considering it's just so societally dependent, what do you think what are some things we can do to promote mental health in a community, and for other people?
To me, the biggest thing is for us to all learn respect on honor boundaries, both our own and each other's. So for us to know, well, I'm at my cap now, I'm at my limit, and I'm not going to take on a new project, and I'm not going to go and do this extra thing for my friend's birthday because I love her so much. Um, we're going to learn to say, actually, I'm full. I'm at my cap right now. I need to rest. Uh, and while we can learn to do it for ourselves, we can also learn to tune into the signs when someone else might be at their limit. We can even inquire, how much space have you got? How much juice have you got in your tank right now? Um, a lot of people won't be able to say, yeah, I'm full. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do anymore because of that shame. But sometimes we can intuit that someone's got a lot of that on their plate. Not only can we be really conscious and hold back from adding more to their plate, but we can see if we have the energy, if we have the capacity, can we help take something off someone's plate? And sometimes when we're at that limit, when we're so full, just having someone take something off our plate creates more space, it creates more capacity, and we can breathe a little better. So, for example, if you know a mum's having a really hard time, what is it like to bring her a meal so she doesn't have to cook? What is it like to offer to do a drop off or a pickup? These very small things are actually really big, because when we take something off our plate, when we empty out, we replenish our energy, and we can actually have the capacity to begin to heal, and find equilibrium again. If we're either at or over capacity all the time, we can't enter the natural experience of repair and rebalance, which will always happen inside us if we have the space, if we have the resources.
Oh, that's a great example of helping a friend. What if you notice someone you don't know as well, maybe a colleague or an acquaintance that you do want to help, you think they're, struggling? What's a tactful way to kind of inquire about how you can help?
One of the beautiful sentences that I love is, "How could I support you right now?" And it's such a simple, non-invasive question. Most people will actually, if you just say, "Let me know if you need anything, let me know if I can help," they'll say, "Oh, it's cool, I'm good, thanks." But if you actually, instead of offering a closed sentence, if you open dialogue with a question, "How can I support you right now?" you're more likely to start a conversation where you can find just a small way. And I think small ways are really important. That person might say, "Oh, if you're going to the shop, can you grab me a coffee?" Or these things need to get delivered to another department. If you're going that way, could you take them? And again, these really small things can make a huge difference, especially if there are multiple small things happening every day. I mean, in the end, this is actually just kindness, and community, and we've lost that a lot. So we can just ask, "How can I support you right now?" It's very simple. But I think something else to consider is, so many of us, because we are at capacity, or overflowing our capacity, we often don't have the energy to even think about anybody else. So I think we need to address our own capacity first. There are many of us that would rather load ourselves to help somebody else, than actually find stability, within our own boundaries and within our own capacity. And that's that shame piece again. Many of us have been told that giving, and serving makes us worthy and valuable. And if we're not putting other people before ourselves, then we're bad or wrong or shameful. So there's this interesting interplay, isn't it? But if we bring it all back to capacity, how much capacity do I have for myself, and how much capacity do I have to give to others? It becomes a really simple question of energy.
Okay, question for you. How do you accept help without feeling shame? Because I know some people might, like you said, say, "Oh, no, I'm fine. It's good. No problem." How do you give yourself the space to accept help?
I think it is a process. I remember when I started accepting help, I was full of shame. So I'll share a bit of a story from my illness. So it's many, many, many years ago. I was so unwell, both physically and mentally, and I had two babies at the time, like brand new babies, and I just was not able to ask for help and not able to accept help, because I had that strong woman, personality. And it actually took for my body to shut down and me to need to go to hospital for me to accept help. Like I couldn't have help without it. So people had to come and play with my kids and bring meals for them. People had to drive me to rehab. And in those months, there's about 5 months, 2 months in hospital and 3 months in rehab, going back and forth to rehab every day to learn to walk, because I literally couldn't walk during that time. I felt so much shame just accepting help, but I think there's something about sitting with it and doing it anyway, that shifts it. And that experience taught me that, gosh, we need each other. Community is so important. And most of us don't reach out for help or accept help until we're in a really dire position, just like in my story. And what we need to learn to do is to repattern our relationship with help. Help should be coming every single day. We need each other. We do better together. But we have learned societally that you only ask for help when you really can't cope, when the plane's going down. And we just need to push through the shame, and keep telling ourselves that this is how it's meant to be. So there's this huge societal reconditioning that we need to go through. And it all starts with a handful of us, the 1,000 of us that are here today, making a choice, setting an intention, and moving forward to demonstrate a different way of living here and relating here.
It's such a beautiful thing, helping someone and receiving help, and is such a wonderful way to build a bond. Getting over the shame of it, being a little vulnerable and saying, yeah, I really did, I needed that. Like, it's lovely when it happens. I'm really glad we're talking about community. Obviously, that's such an important thing for Meetup. And interpersonal relationships. Can you talk a bit about why they're so necessary for mental health?
As babies, we are born into relationship. So the first relationships we have are with our mother and father. So we are relational creatures. We do not exist alone, and we cannot exist alone, even if we try and convince ourselves that we can. So when we come out of our mother's body, ideally, in an ideal situation, it doesn't happen for all of us, we would go onto her chest or her stomach. And it's in the safety of that relationship and that non-verbal relationship at that moment that we learn, wow, I'm not alone. I'm safe here and everything's going to be okay. And so what happens is that the mother's nervous system and body, her skin and her organs, help the baby to regulate and to feel connection and to learn, oh, I can breathe, I can open my mouth, I can eat, I can make sound, I can be held. And so all of these things we learn in the first moments of our life, and it's all in relationship. And as we go on through childhood, it's through relationships that we learn how to do all kinds of things. Through reflection, we learn how to smile and how to laugh and how to frown. We learn how to speak through relationships. So it's just innate in us. The thing is that the need for connection and reflection and validation and mirroring and learning dynamically doesn't change. But somewhere along the way, as we grow, many of us have forgotten this. And this is partly because as we grow, we also want individuation. So we need both belonging and individuation as we grow. We need to learn who we are independently. Some of us forget along the way that we also need to belong. And this will mainly happen if we haven't had a really safe, validating family dynamic early on in life. And when we look to healing, essentially, we want to learn how to recreate experiences of both belonging and individuation, which means we can feel connected to people. We can also feel independent and like we have a sense of sovereignty in the world. And many of us, because of the way we've grown up or because of the context of the world now, don't really know how to have both. So we tend to forgo one for the other. So either I'm really connected to people and I belong, but I don't have really good boundaries and I put everyone first and then I'm burnt out or resentful, or I don't need connection. I'm strong and I'm independent and I can do everything alone. And so both of those are adaptations to not being given this really healthy balance of belonging and individuation. So as we heal, relationship healing is a really big piece of it. We want to find people who accept us just as we are, and welcome our independence and don't, I guess, shame us or judge us for being different or not being the same as others.
If you struggle with finding that sense of belonging or letting your guard down enough to have people in your life build that, bond and trust, do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
I think it's a complex nonlinear journey. Usually, if we have difficulty being vulnerable or bringing our barriers down, it's because somewhere along the way we've learned that connection can be harmful. Either it can really harm us or it can abandon us eventually. And so these are our past relational trauma stories affecting us now. And what we've learned to do is, in one way or another, protect ourselves from being harmed or excluded. And so as we heal, we learn to identify our protective mechanisms and question, is this armor that I'm wearing, or this shield that I'm using, or this spear that I'm jabbing, is it needed now? Or is it safe for me to put it down or take it off? And if we can get to that place where we can inquire, very often the case is that, oh, this reactive tendency I have to self-protect and disconnect, maybe it's not needed. Maybe it was in the past, but maybe here now it's safe to bring it down. Something that I think can be really helpful is to remember that we are great at survival. We are great at protecting ourselves. We are great at armoring up and holding our weapons. And if we do take them down, we're not going to forget them. So we can always put back on our protective armor and bring up our defenses. It's very natural. It's harder to bring them down. And another thing that can be helpful is to learn to test our vulnerability in small doses with the right people. So it's almost like dipping our finger into the waters of vulnerability, bringing down the shield. Is this safe? Is this safe? No. Okay, I'm going to put it back on again. And the more we learn that we can be vulnerable, but we can also protect, and we can step in and we can step out, the more comfortable we get with trying it out in different relationships, and the more comfortable we get with discerning who is safe and who is not, because not everybody is a safe person. So we don't want to be vulnerable with everybody. And we can also choose different levels of vulnerability with different people, depending on what's appropriate at any given time and in any given relationship. It's a bit of a dance, but to know that we get to choose is very powerful.
I love that, the idea of incrementally dialing up your vulnerability. Let's dig into the other scenario a little bit. Let's say you're really comfortable with groups, perhaps maybe even dependent on your friendships and your community to the point where your individuality suffers, you put yourself last. What advice do you have for someone with that tendency?
This is all about boundaries. So many of us don't have healthy boundaries, and either we've learned that boundaries are bad or wrong, or we just have no idea what they are. We've just been taught that you go with the flow and you do whatever the tribe is doing. And so when we begin to start setting boundaries, we will either feel shame or fear, or some mix of both of them. So we might feel like, oh, I shouldn't say I can't go to this event because it will really upset someone and they'll not like me so much, or they'll yell at me, or whatever it is. That's a very common scenario. And healing asks us to notice that fear, or that potential shame, that anticipatory shame, and say, but I'm really tired tonight and I need to just have a rest. And so we'll sort of then set a boundary and say, sorry, I can't come today. I really need to take care of myself. It's actually through our healthy boundaries that we learn how respectful the people in our lives are. So a healthy friend would say, sure, of course, please look after yourself. Of course, I wanted you to come, but I really understand your health comes first. Whereas an unhealthy friend would be like, you awful person, how could you do this to me? I'm so upset. And they will actually give the judgment and give the shame. So our boundaries really help inform where there is balance or imbalance in our lives. And when we set them, we might be afraid of that negative response, that unhealthy response. And so that's the reason we often don't do it. We're worried that our healthy boundary is going to cause displeasure. And often, if we are a people pleaser archetype, it will. But the healing asks us to do it anyway and learn who's truly nurturing us and who isn't. And then there's a whole unfolding from there that I call relational recalibration. So when we start setting boundaries, either we'll begin to get closer and more balanced with certain of our friends, the relationship will change and become more harmonious. Or sometimes if we've been in a relationship where someone's really benefiting from our lack of boundaries, they're not going to be really very pleased. And so then we'll have to recalibrate in another way, which is perhaps taking a step back, or in some cases, ending relationships too. So it's quite complex.
It is complex, but also so important to know who you're working with, right? Is this a healthy, stabling force in my life, or is it someone who's going to keep me off kilter? I'm curious what how do we know if we're being good friends? And how can you foster a healthy friendship with someone else in your life?
I believe that good friendships have some level of reciprocity. So it can't be one-sided. So that person needs to be there for us and we need to be there for them too. And ideally on both ends, there's a level of being very forgiving, knowing that life is complex and there are many demands. So we can't expect too much all the time from others. So do I listen to my friend? Do I show up and support my friend? Am I forgiving and accepting when my friend isn't able to meet my needs? Because in all friendships, there will be times where people can't support us. They don't have that bandwidth. And similarly, we don't have it to give them as well. So can we be authentic and can we be loving through the dissonance? Because everything's fine when everyone's on board and everything's fabulous and there's fun things going on, but everybody goes through hard times. So can we be very forgiving and nurture the need to take space and be okay when people can't show up for us all the time?
I understand that you came with a poem that you wanted to read and share with our audiences before we get into the Q&A. Would this be a good time for that?
Sure.
Excellent.
So this poem is called The Sacred Cauldron, and it's all about the need for us to heal together. Healing happens between us in the reflections of goodness, the gentle holding of darkness, the shared collective breath, a unified heartbeat, the ownership of privilege and power, shared capacity, respect and reverence, a sacred cauldron where we place our pain, let it simmer and rise like smoke into the sky, ashes becoming restorative compost for our aching earth, the seed of our regeneration, a living, loving prayer of transformation, one conscious interaction at a time. Slowly, slowly, we heal with each other. We heal for each other. Let it begin here.
That was beautiful. And that was an original poem?
Yes.
Amazing. So
you.
talented. I'm impressed. Okay, so let's get into the Q&A. We have a bunch of great questions from the audience. I hope we can get to a lot of them. So first thing, Eliezer asked, how do we set boundaries to our shame feeling?
The shame feeling often comes as a sense or a voice. And so I like to develop what I call the conscious healing self, which is often for many of us a new voice that says, no, I'm not going to treat myself that way, or I'm not going to let shame lead me. And so it's really a conscious effort to meet that voice or that part of ourselves that's taken us towards a life of shame and say no.
Okay, this question is from Hotfish. How would you advise new retirees who have lost a sense of purpose or conversely bring high productivity expectations from their career into their retiring life?
I think it's so hard when we've spent so many years in a state of high intensity or productivity that sometimes slowing down can make us feel all kinds of things, from very anxious to very low. And again, I think beginning with compassion and learning, well, of course I'm feeling strange because I'm used to going at a much faster speed. So normalizing it often allows us to step out of shame and into compassion. I also think when we are at the space where we no longer have to run at full steam, all of a sudden there are these choices that open up to us, which perhaps we haven't been used to if we've been working 5 days a week or more for many, many years. So something that can be helpful is to ask ourselves, well, what would light me up? How can I expend energy in a way that will serve me. But I do think it would be very normal that if we've been running at full steam for many, many years, the moment we slow, we might have questions around our worth, and those shaming voices might come up. And again, we need to meet it with compassion and say, well, I'm in a recalibration phase now, and how do I wish to recalibrate my energy?
Kind of a similar question, but for a very different point in life. How would you advise a parent, a full-time parent, to give themselves a mental health day?
It's really hard. I'm a parent. I'm currently only a part-time parent now because I'm divorced. But I think back to the days when I was a full-time parent and I had two children 18 months apart, which is really hard for anyone who doesn't know. And I think it's really hard to get a break. Sometimes we can't. If we're able to have a partner or a friend to help us, give us a little break, that can be really helpful. For me, it's also helpful looking back to remember it's only a stage. And at some point, either the kids are going to be in school or they're going to be old enough to start looking after themselves. So the way I feel about parenting now compared to when my children were babies is very different. But even if we can't get a whole day to ourselves, perhaps we can get a few hours here and there. So I think we have to learn to take what we can get. And it always helps me to remember that everything in life is a stage, and whatever we're going through now will shift, because that is the way life works.
This question comes from Monica. What if you have no one to help you, but you feel like you're near burnout?
That's really hard. I've been there. I think that there are often people who can help us in small ways, but we have to get creative about tapping into new people and new resources. And the people and the resources that we tap into will be different depending on what we need. So there are many resources for mental health out there. There are many community organizations. So when I was a burnt out mum, I joined a group called Mama Bake. That was a group of mums that got together and cooked for each other. So we'd only all have to cook one night a week. So there are so many community resources. And I mean, that's what Meetup is also all about, isn't it? Creating groups where people can connect and share. So sometimes we just need to get really, really creative. But at the same time, I don't want to invalidate that feeling that there's no one to help me, because I've been there. And sometimes we can't get access to the specific help we need, but even a sort of adjacent help or a different help is better than no help at all.
Ramona asked, I'm learning about willingness and willfulness, when I should be willing to engage in life and not willful and staying in a rut. How do I balance my boundaries? I was advised with helping others, but how do I not take on too much?
I think this is helpful to start learning your somatic signals that are a yes and are a no and a too much. And in order to do this, we have to be somatized or associated to our bodies. So we would have heard of the term gut instinct. If we connect to our body, we'll have a healthy gut instinct that either says, yes, this is really good for me, or no, this is no good for me, or I like this, but I'm capped, my energy is capped. And so association and somatization is a great beginning to learn this. And if you're interested to do that, actually on my Spotify, there's a whole series of somatic meditations, and in my book, there are as well. So that's a process in itself. But really, if we're not associated to our body and the signals that it's telling us, it's whispering to us all the time, it's going to be really hard to find it. So we might then feel like we all of a sudden are giving, and then we've burnt ourselves out, or we're really pulling back, we've got more energy to give. So this is where somatics comes into play. It's really helpful for tuning into those instincts and impulses and little red flag alarm bells that are happening inside us all of the time.
That is a great point. Your body is constantly communicating with yourself, and it's so easy to just ignore it, ignore the check engine light, all of that. But taking time to tune in is key for this. So related to this, Christy asked, besides your book, which I have in my Amazon cart, what other books on self-compassion would you recommend?
One of the most famous authors on self-compassion is Dr. Kristen Neff, and she's actually based in Austin. So I definitely recommend to look up her work.
Very nice. This question comes from Caitlin. How can we work on compassion with ourselves?
To me, it's a daily practice. Still for me, after all these years and even working in the field and, helping people heal, it's a daily practice, it's a daily prayer. And so I bring compassion into my meditations regularly, both proactively and reactively. So I'll intend to enter a state of compassion most days, but still, because the world is a really intense place, I will learn to notice when I move into judgment. And that happens on a daily basis because that's part of what happens in the world that we live in. So we get these goggles where we start comparing or thinking, I don't like that person, whatever it is, to notice and, I've shifted out of compassion. I'm going to shift back in. So to me, that's daily practice.
I love that. A daily practice we should all work on. I think with that, we are at time. But before we break, I just wanted to give Natalia the chance to talk about the courses she's offering and the special discount for Meetup members. If we did that.
Thank you so much for having me. So, if you would like to learn more about my work and all of the resources that are available for healing, there's a number of ways. You can check out my book, Why Am I Like This? And there are a couple of ways to engage. I have all kinds of courses online, but two special ones that I really want to invite you to and offer you a discount to are my Human Intelligence Leadership Program that is commencing online. There's a global group gathering. It's 3-month journey, 2 sessions a week, 2 sessions a month live with me, and then also some online learning in between. And in that course, we learn what it means to be informed, what it means to show up as a human that heals, and what it means to start getting really intelligent in the ways that we're relating each other. Because I really believe that relationship is the remedy to all of our distress and dysfunction, that capacity to do it, to show up as humans who heal. So that's what it's all about. Then there is also a special course that I filmed last year in New York all about boundaries. And this one is for boundaries and leadership. So if you're in a role as a leader or if you support people in your lives, this is a really great online learning tool. And again, there's a discount for all of you that have joined the session today. So it's a sort of a small step in, whereas the other course is sort of a big leap into doing the deep work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us on World Mental Health Day. Natalia, thank you so much for your insights and this fabulous discussion. I know I got so much out from it. All right, bye.
Thank you so much for having me and to everyone for joining.